We're in Daniel chapter 6 this morning, talking about the principles from these Bible stories that many of us may have heard all of our lives. And they're not just cute children's stories, they're stories given in the Word of God to guide us and to give us principles on how to deal with life today in this 21st century, whatever it is. Thank you. Okay. One more. Daniel chapter 6 today. Next Sunday we'll do the only New Testament passage we're going to deal with. And then the last Sunday of the month we're going to talk about how we're getting old and how we're all dying. But so you have to come back and I'll fill in the blanks when we get there. That's right, Dennis. We are all there sometimes. So I like to read the philosophers sometimes. Not so much reading, but finding quotes, because the philosophers of old said some interesting stuff. Got to be careful. Philosophy is a dangerous field, but it also is a field that does have some great things to teach us. Let me read a familiar quote from one of the great philosophers. I am who I am, and that's all that I am. I saw a show the other day and somebody said, what was Popeye's favorite food? And somebody said, chicken. Well, we know it wasn't chicken. Now, that's a humorous, unapologetic declaration of self-acceptance. Popeye's like, this is who I am. And what you see is who I am and what you get. The song we sang earlier, I'll be what you want me to be. Go beyond actions, beyond words. This is who I am. Popeye said that. It implies a person knows their strengths and weaknesses, and though they don't promote them, they don't hide them. They simply present themselves for who they are, and who they are, what they believe, or who they believe in our case. Daniel, the great prophet, the great advisor to kings, was just such a man. He carried himself in a consistent, honest way from the moment he and his three friends and the rest of those that were taken captive, from the moment they got to Babylon, all the way through when they offered their supervisor an alternative to the food that was offered to them, to the demonstration of their commitment to God in times of trial and danger. In all those times, Daniel showed himself to be an unwavering and honest man. This is who I am. You don't have to like that. You don't have to be like me. But Daniel says, this is who I am. I am who I am. And I will not change. As we learned in our Sunday school classes, Daniel was the same in his attitude to his supervisor. There in the beginning, Daniel chapter 1. He was the same to the king when he was presented to the king. And understand that Daniel served in at least three dynasties. Twice. He started in Babylon. At least two more times that kingdom was overthrown. In an era when the advisors to the previous kingdom were always killed because you couldn't trust their loyalty to the new kingdom, Daniel remained and served under not just three kings, but three different nations, and was elevated in every single one of them. But Daniel demonstrated his faithfulness and his constancy to the king, but more importantly, and maybe most importantly, to his God, to Jehovah God. And he never changed who he was. Much like Popeye, Daniel was who he presented himself to be. Now, the Bible paints a picture of Daniel as a paragon of virtue. Paragon of virtue. He's portrayed as a man of impeccable character. When some of his fellow advisors got jealous of him and attempted to destroy him, they were famously unable to. Daniel is considered a flawless example of moral excellence and good character. If you read about Daniel in the Bible, you see nothing wrong. You see no errors in his way. He is presented as this godly, always constant individual who serves God. He stood firm as a man. He stood firm as a servant in forced captivity in a foreign country. And he stood strong as a committed servant of Jehovah God. He did well in every single area. What you saw in Daniel's actions was the man that he truly was. That was his character. So now we're going to focus primarily on Daniel chapter 6. So if you want to go there and look at that, you can. We're going to jump a little bit to chapter 1. We're also going to jump to the New Testament once, but primarily Daniel chapter 6 this morning. And the two principles that we're going to look at. We're going to look at two today. I know Baptist is supposed to do three, but we'll deal with that another day. Maybe next week I'll do 4, 5, or 6, or 7. We'll see. But two for today. Number one, be such a great worker that your boss likes having you there. Do we even have to say that? Is that even something that has to be said? Work in such a way, be the kind of person that the people who work with you or the people that you are around like having you there. That's number one. And then number two, which we'll get to in a few minutes, develop a pattern of godly behavior. Develop a pattern of godly behavior. And then I've added and keep it, but primarily develop a pattern of godly behavior. Now they go together. They enhance one another. They strengthen one another. We'll start with the first one. In Daniel chapter 6 is the account of Daniel in the lion's den. We all heard that as children if you came to Sunday school. In fact, even unbelievers, even atheists have heard the story of Daniel in the lion's den, depending on how you believe it, whether it'll change your life or not. But the narrative reveals that Daniel gets tossed into the lion's den only in part because of the edict of the king. The edict that the king got tricked into signing. We are told in Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 to 3, that the king, King Darius at the time, divided his kingdom into 120 regions. And then he took those 120 regions and he put what the Bible calls satraps over each region. Now, a satrap is simply a regional magistrate who oversees the taxation, security, and justice on behalf of the king. In other words, this magistrate, these 120 magistrates, are representatives of the king. If you have a question for the king, you come to the magistrate. The magistrate either adjudicates it and makes a decision or pushes it on up the line. Now, the next step was not the king, because the passage also says that over these 120 magistrates, the king put 3 governors. And so if there was a problem in a region, they went to the magistrate. If they had to push it up, he pushed it up to these governors, and then if they had to push it up, it went to the king. But it saved the king from having to deal with every little thing it handled. Now, of the 3 governors, Daniel was one, and the Bible is very clear that Daniel was the best of the 3. He excelled over the other 2. Verse 3 of chapter 6 says, Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole nation. He was not only better than the 120, he was better than the 3. And this becomes almost a Joseph situation, Joseph, son of Jacob, where Joseph is put second only in the kingdom, and King Darius considers putting Daniel into that position of second in the kingdom. Not only over the 120, but over the governors as well. The best of the best, cream of the crop, top dog, however you want to say it. Daniel excelled because he was so efficient and so good and such a great advisor. The king considered him putting over the other 2 governors and over the entire 120 regions as well. Now, this favoritism irked the other 2 and also the 120 magistrates. They didn't like that. And they tried to get rid of Daniel. They're substandard, so you attack the person who's excelling. You see that in sporting events. Who gets the most grief? Oftentimes, the player that gets the most grief is the one who's been the most successful for a longest period of time. They didn't like Daniel, so they tried to bring him down. But they couldn't. They couldn't bring him down. Verse 4, so the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Daniel distinguished himself as the supreme example of service. He was in a pagan kingdom. It was forced captivity. Daniel didn't choose to go to Babylon. But he was in the middle of idol worship. Babylon was idolatrous. They had multiple gods. But Daniel viewed his service as service to God and therefore did it better than anybody else. Daniel actually takes a page from the Apostle Paul's playbook out of the book of Colossians when it says, "And whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ." Our service is not to people. Our service is to God. And when we view our work that way, it changes what we do, maybe more importantly, how we do it. How do I become that person that the people I work with or the people that I hang with or the people that I'm with, maybe people that are over me, how do I get to the point that they like having me there? I serve as if I'm serving Christ. That's how I serve. If you look at the passage, chapter 5, verse 12, and then again in chapter 6, verse 3, Daniel is referred to as having an excellent spirit. What is an excellent spirit? Think of somebody who has when you think of the being said they has an excellent spirit, what do you think that means? You thinking about it or just staring at me? So the endorsement describes someone who has an outstanding character. Notice that the first quality is not a strong work ethic or a good worker. The first characteristics pointed out is an outstanding character, integrity, that this is a man you can trust. This is a woman you can trust. This is a person that is honest. The excellent spirit relates to a person who is consistently, do you hear that? Consistently, who consistently demonstrates certain character qualities throughout their life. The characteristics of Daniel's excellent spirit include uncompromising integrity. Uncompromising integrity. Daniel is completely faithful, no corruption or negligence found in him. He is honest. His colleagues could not find any fault in him because there was no fault in him. He didn't just hide it well, it wasn't there. A man, a woman with an excellent spirit has uncompromising integrity. They also have divine wisdom and capability. Daniel possessed knowledge, understanding, and problem-solving abilities clearly tied to his deep connection. Clearly tied to his deep connection with God. Daniel wasn't just lucky or good. He was committed to his God, and it showed itself in wisdom and capability. Do you think that what adjectives do I use? Do you think that our pagan politicians are dumb? No, they're not dumb. They're immoral. They lack God, for the most part. They lack a godly morality. But most of them are not dumb. In fact, most of them are extremely intelligent. But without God, it doesn't do any good. Wisdom leads you astray. Knowledge leads you astray rather than lead you aright. Daniel was a man of divine wisdom and capability. And then finally, exceptional loyalty. A person with an excellent spirit has exceptional loyalty. Despite living in a foreign, often hostile culture, Daniel remained steadfastly dedicated not only to God, but to the king as well. And thus he did his best at the task that he was given. As I read earlier, whatever you do, do it as to the Lord, not to men, knowing that from the Lord you receive the reward. Daniel was a man of exceptional loyalty. He didn't have to like the king. He didn't have to like what had happened to him being dragged into captivity. But when he's given a job, he did it well, which is why he remained through 3 dynasties. He was loyal to the king that he served under. We know that this excellent spirit was even seen elsewhere when he first came to Babylon. It's here in chapter 6, but it wasn't the first time that Daniel showed concern for his boss or his supervisor, however you want to refer to it. We all know the stories from, I'm assuming we all know the story from chapter 1. Daniel and a bunch of others, we particularly are aware of his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, better known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When a bunch of them were first brought in, they were brought into the palace. They had a year of training, and after that year of training, they had to be the best in every area, the best mental, the best intellectual, the best physically fit. They would go before the king, and the king would decide if he was going to use them, advise. They had to be the best. So they come in, and all this food that they're provided, and Daniel's three friends go, "We can't eat that. It's unclean. We can't eat that. We're Jewish." Daniel had to maintain his Jewish identity, but rather than throwing an entitled crybaby fit, what does he do? He goes to his supervisor, the guy that was over them. He says, "Look, we can't eat this, but let's make this deal. Let's try this." Now remember, his supervisor answered to the king, and the king didn't need a whole lot of reason to chop the guy's head off. These men that came in had to look and act good. They had to be the best. So Daniel comes in and he says, "Look, give us 10 days. If at the end of 10 days we're not better than everybody else, then we'll do what you want." And of course, we know that at the end of 10 days they were better than anybody else. And so the supervisor took all the unclean food away and fed him what Daniel and his friends were eating, which didn't make Daniel real popular. But that's not the point. Is the point to be popular, or is the point to be faithful? Daniel and his friends offered this option to the leader, but they maintained their Jewish identity. They would not forget who they were. Are you an asset to your company? Are you someone when your friends see you coming, they run away and hide? Or do they go and welcome you in? Leslie owned a business. I worked there. And there were people that you see coming across the parking lot, and I suddenly had something I had to do in the back, and it was going to take me a while. There were other people that come in, you see them coming across the parking lot, you open the door for them because you love having them there. What kind of person am I? What kind of person are you? Do you have an excellent spirit? Do you meet those character qualities? Are you even trying? Are you even trying? We're not always going to be liked. I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but you're not liked by everybody. And if you are, you're probably doing something wrong. But we need to put ourselves in a position where even those who don't like us cannot find fault with us. They may not like us, they may not like what we do, but they have to look at us and go, but they're a good worker. They're a good person. They have integrity, they have honesty. I hate them, I hope they go away, but I can't bring any charge against them. That's Daniel's position. That's what happened to Daniel. Be such a person that you're beneficial to the people around you. You make them better by your presence. Not liked, but you make them better. And that's the number one principle. Number two, develop a pattern. Develop a pattern of godly living. I would venture that most of us have a pattern in our life. I don't know about your retired people. I'm not sure what your pattern is, but I'm assuming you have one. Get up in the morning, get a cup of coffee, clean the house for your wife, take care of you people that work. I'm sure you have a pattern. You get up, you have breakfast, maybe you work out, maybe you go for a run, come back in, get to work, go to your job, cook. There's a pattern to our lives. That's good. Well, develop that pattern of godly living. Get up in the morning, have your quiet time, spend some time in prayer, and go to work. Maybe you're not that kind of morning person. Maybe you're like a late night person. Then get up, go to work, come home in the evening, open your Bible, start praying, spend time in prayer, call somebody you know that needs to be encouraged, stop by and visit on the way home. Develop a pattern of how you're going to live your life for God. Again, Daniel spent his entire life developing healthy, godly patterns of living. You know who we should thank for that? His parents. Who were his parents? Who were Daniel's parents? Do you know? Nobody does. It's not told. We're not told who his parents were. In fact, I even did a little bit of research, and I emphasize the word little, of Jewish history. I tried to find like Josephus, or maybe some of those Jewish historians. What did they say about Daniel and his family? Nobody says anything. We just don't know. They were probably royal. They were probably prominent in Jerusalem because those are the people that Babylon took. They took the prominent ones, so they were probably prominent in Israel, in Jerusalem. But we do know this about them. They taught their son well. They taught their son well. Parents, just because you need to teach your kids well, you need to start these patterns. Now, that doesn't guarantee, because kids make their own decisions, particularly as they get older. But we have to start them off right. We begin developing patterns in their life that hopefully will then carry on as they keep going. Daniel and his three friends started right away. Instead of diving in there, what's recorded in chapter 1, instead of diving in right from the very get-go, the very first few days they were there, they began to set a pattern. I'm going to stick with who God wants me to be. And I'm not going to be an ornery, mean, rotten, nasty person, but I'm going to stay with how God wants me to live my life. I'm not going to compromise. Their actions not only helped them, but they also made their supervisor and them look good as well. Daniel taught and worked right from the very beginning. He was not a Babylonian, and he never would be Babylonian. He was an Israelite captive, and he would remain an Israelite captive to the day he died. And remember, he was in Babylon at least 70 years, because that was the length of the captivity. As you get into the later chapters in Daniel, you realize Daniel's even calling God and going, God, you said that in 70 years we could go back. Some of us could go back. So we know that Daniel was in Babylon at least 70 years. If he was taken captive between 15 and 20, looking at a man who's 85 to 90 years old, but he served well, but he never became Babylonian. He remained a Jewish captive who served in the position that he was in. It didn't matter that he was captive in a foreign land. He refused to look like, talk like, or act like a member of the society in that he lived in. Daniel served and served well. He was the best. Even the pagan king acknowledged that. But he never took on the look or lifestyle of the Babylonian culture. He remained separate. Got him into trouble. His comrades didn't like him. Again, we've talked about chapter 6. His peers didn't like the fact that he excelled above them. Chapter 6, verses 3 and 4. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because of an excellent spirit was in him. The king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful, nor was any error or fault found in him. They couldn't bring a charge because there's no charge to bring. We talked about that. There was no fault in him. He was a paragon of virtue. He was this man who stood for God and was faithful to the kingdom, even though he wasn't a part of that kingdom. And then they say this, we shall not find any charge against Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. We hate this guy, and we'll do everything we can to bring him down. And if we have to manipulate King Darius to do it, we'll do it, which is exactly what they did. Chapter 6, verses 6 through 9 record how they tricked Darius into signing a document that said you can only pray to the king for the next 30 days, and if you pray to anybody other than the king for 30 days, you get thrown into the den of lions and destroyed and killed. Why did they make that? Why did these governors and these magistrates make that rule? Because they knew that David prayed to his God 3 times a day. And they knew that David would... David. I knew I was going to do that. They knew that Daniel would not break his routine because he was faithful to his God. We read in verse 10, "Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed," that's a significant statement. When Daniel knew that the edict, the writing had been signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom from early days, since early days. Think about this. How did David get a room facing Jerusalem? Dumb luck? No. I think David told the king, "I want to live in that apartment. I want that house." King said, "You got it, Daniel. You got it." If I say David, please just say Daniel. Now it's in my head. Daniel told the king, "Look, I want that apartment." He didn't have to say why. We could say, "Daniel, why do you want that apartment?" Because when I open the windows, I look toward Jerusalem. That's why I want that apartment. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care how big or small it is. I want the window, and I open this window. And notice that when Daniel knew the decree was signed, he could have easily goes, "Well, I'll just keep the windows closed." No. I don't do that. Daniel's like, I don't do that. I'm not ashamed of my God. I'm not ashamed of my prayers. I know it's dangerous. I understand the danger that's here. But I'm not changing because of some vile edict. I'm going to do what I've always done for the last X number of years. I'm going to open my windows and at 3 times a day I'm going to bow and I'm going to pray to the God of Israel, to the true God, the only God. One commentator writes, Daniel 6 presents the archetype of civil disobedience rooted in devotion to God. The threat of the lion's den cannot silence prayer, illustrating that genuine faith prays just as he had done before. I'm not changing because of a vile rule. Now, we need to understand something. This is a rabbit trail, which is awesome in my Sunday school class, but it can add time today, so we're still good. We got 9 minutes. Pick up on the first line of that commentator. Daniel 6 presents an archetype of civil disobedience rooted in devotion to God. Not rooted in Daniel's rights. I have a right to pray. Not rooted in, don't tell me what to do. Not rooted in social injustice. Not rooted in reparations. Not rooted in, I want my way. This is the law of God, and this is what drives me to civil disobedience, Daniel would say. Has nothing to do with me or with the kingdom. It has everything to do with God. His disobedience to the command was rooted in his commitment and his devotion to God. We have too many crybabies today. I don't watch the news, but I hear reports and people are mad because somebody hurt my feelings or they used the wrong term or they called me the wrong thing, yada, yada, blah, blah. I'm sorry. If civil disobedience isn't born out of a devotion to the God, that the Creator God, then it's probably not really valid. That'll get me in trouble. That's okay. The question then follows is, what distinguishes us as followers of Christ? What sets us apart? Can't be kindness, because I know some unbelievers are a lot nicer than some Christians. Can't be generosity, because I know some unbelievers that are more generous than some Christians. What sets us apart as a true follower of Jesus Christ? What excellent spirit do we exhibit, that drives the enemy crazy? If we have nothing that irritates the enemy of our soul, are we really even a follower of Christ? Daniel said, I'm not going to stop praying for one day. I'm not going to stop praying for 30 days. You can forget that, because this sets me apart from everybody else in this Babylonian kingdom. What sets us apart as Christians? There has to be something. If I look like, act like, talk like, and even think like an unbeliever, what's the point in following Christ? If somebody looks at me day after day and sees no difference, there's a problem. We need to set ourselves apart by how we worship, how we look, and how we serve our God. Daniel got under the skin of his colleagues and tossed to his death because of that. Tossed to his death because he worshiped, prayed to his God, and they had made that illegal. Skipping prayer for even one day or a month was not acceptable to Daniel. I've said that. Hiding his prayer was unacceptable to Daniel. He opened the windows, faced Jerusalem, and prayed, not because he had to, not because he wanted to, but because it was the only thing to do. It's who I am. Daniel said, I am who I am, and this is who I am. This is how I will be. Lots of distractions, lots of situations to threaten, to encourage us to temper our practice of faith. But developing a pattern will strengthen our resolve and strengthen our witness for God. Popeye famously said, I am who I am, and that's all that I am. And when it comes to faith, can we say that as well? This is who I am. Inner, right from the very core. When it comes to faith, are we who we say we are? Or is this how we are on Sunday morning? Are we who we say we are? Or do our actions reveal who we really are? From the start of our Christian experience, we develop patterns that will carry us through life. So as we wrap this up, are we a person others like having around? Have we developed a pattern of godly living that we stick to? In Daniel 1:8, it says that Daniel purposed in his heart. Now, different translations say different things. One said Daniel decided. One said he resolved. One said he made up his mind. They're all saying the same thing. We get the picture. Daniel chose to develop a godly pattern of living, and he stuck with it his whole life, even when it got dangerous. How are we doing with that? How are we doing with that? Have you made the decision, and are you sticking with it? Our success with God depends on it. Let's pray.